Hello everybody, I'm back with another cave exploring disaster story. I hope you're doing well and thank you for being here. So in today's story, a young man tries to explore a nightmarishly small cave tunnel. It was a bad idea. Let's just say it ends in the worst and the most horrifying way possible. Viewer discretion is advised, especially if you have claustrophobia. Alright, with that said, let's get to the story. Neil Moss was a 20-year-old undergraduate in Oxford University studying philosophy. He loved sports in general, but his favorite activity was to go exploring the vast unknown darkness underground. Which brings us to his passion, caving. He would explore basically any cave that he gets the chance to. And one such journey was the expedition deep under the grounds of Derbyshire. On 22nd of March 1959, Neil as usual joined a group from the British Speleological Association to explore Stalagmite Chamber in Peak Cavern, one of England's best-known cave systems. Including Neil, the group was consisted of 8 cavers. Their plan was to explore this one specific cave passage that had never been explored by any human. It is located half a mile from the cave entrance. But it was no normal cave passage though. It was terrifyingly narrow, which I guess is what makes it so special and also makes cavers want to explore despite the dangers. So on that fateful Sunday, the group set off. They elbowed, crawled and climbed their way through the muddy passages of Peak Cavern 1,000 feet below ground until they came to the spacious Stalagmite Chamber. The chamber that leads to the petrifyingly vertical shaft which leads almost straight down into the earth. That's what these cavers intended to explore. Just seeing the sight of this narrow passage alone excited everyone. To this group of cavers, this journey meant a lot. More new underwater environment to explore along with an incredible adrenaline rush. You see, being able to feel so alive while facing a risk that could quite literally end up killing you gives a certain pleasure and a gratification to a lot of cavers and even scuba divers. I guess that's what this group of cavers might also have felt. The first one to enter this passage was our main character in today's story, Neil. Despite him being 6 feet tall, he was quite slim. So to him, fitting in a narrow passage didn't feel like such a difficult task. So Neil prepared himself to enter the shaft. Meanwhile, 4 other cavers had already inspected the area and learned that the passage is about 40 feet deep with a tricky corkscrew twist in the middle. The shaft first hung slightly off vertical for about 12 feet and then it continues into the darkness. So before Neil entered the tunnel, a 75 feet long ladder was lowered down the hole in case the shaft continued down even more than 40 feet. Because remember, no one had explored this hole before, so no one knows how far down it actually goes. So with that, Neil finally entered the shaft at around 3:30 p.m. So now Neil was passing down, and when about 30 seconds or so passed, he quickly realized that making his way through this tunnel is definitely not as easy as he thought. He might have underestimated it. So as he was making his way down, he came across what believed to be a boulder in a slight recess partially blocking the way. At first he thought he'll be able to shift it, but no, it was too heavy for him to move. After several failed attempts, he realized it was pointless to even try any further. The boulder was unmovable. The team was watching this ordeal and quickly learned that Neil is stuck and cannot go past the boulder. So they dropped a rope down to hoist him back up. You see, because the tunnel is so small, a person cannot find enough space to do much of anything. So ascending through this narrow passage was a nightmare. And just like that, this is where the trouble began. With the little space he had, Neil barely managed to tie the rope to himself, hoping his team will be able to hoist him up, but he was simply too heavy. Every time they tried, the rope snapped. Right away Neil panicked. It just hit him. It was no fun and games anymore. In that moment of panic, Neil lost it. he started acting irrationally. He twisted his body in such a way that left him jammed even tighter just below the corkscrew section of the shaft. Not to mention the ladder they had lowered down the tunnel earlier. It took up some space too. According to the 1982 book Race Against Time, Neil was quote-unquote sandwiched in an elliptical silt only 18 inches wide. The team up from the shaft entrance knew that Neil was acting out of fear. Then they suddenly heard Neil's voice coming somewhere in the middle of the 40-foot-long tunnel. "I say, I'm stuck. I can't budge even an inch." Well, at this point it was pretty obvious. So, since a rope wasn't enough, Neil then said with the ladder he could try and climb up. So he barely reached the lowest rung of the ladder. But the problem was the tunnel. It was so restricted that Neil could not move his legs up far enough to reach the rungs of the ladder. His arms were also stuck by his sides, so he couldn't even flex his elbows in order to pull himself up to the rung above him. But somehow, the panic and the aggression he felt helped him free one of his hands and cling to the rung above him. Finally, something went right. So he asked his fellow cavers to pull the ladder back up while he was able to stay clung to it. Quickly everybody did as Neil asked, but sadly they were only able to lift it a little distance. The ladder itself got jammed. So in spite of Neil having a ladder and a whole team of cavers above to pull him up, he was still completely stuck inside the dark and claustrophobically small passage. Meanwhile, a new problem emerged. Since Neil was blocking the airflow of the shaft, the atmosphere was rapidly getting polluted with carbon dioxide. Although the team was tirelessly trying all kinds of ways to rescue Neil, they realized he was only getting worse. At a certain point, Neil lost his senses. It was quite apparent that he was acting confused and disoriented. It was probably due to the low levels of oxygen in his system. By some, he was described as less cooperative. I mean, it makes sense because his mind was so clouded due to what believed to be carbon dioxide poisoning. He wasn't basically himself and seemed unconcerned about the seriousness of his predicament. In fact, a few even suggested that they go out for a bit and have a bite to eat, which most of the other cavers strongly disagreed to do. You see, if you are a caver, you likely must know the potential conditions a person can develop when they are stuck in a passage with little oxygen to breathe. So Neil acting confused should have been seen as a sign of his worsening health condition. But that didn't seem to be happening with those few cavers who suggested to go and take a break. Though, like I said, not all of Neil's fellow cavers thought that way. They spent hours trying. They never even considered giving up on him. But not even they were an exception to carbon dioxide poisoning. Not only Neil, but now everybody up on the shaft entrance also began suffering from carbon dioxide poisoning. 3 cavers already lost consciousness. The situation has gotten more deadly now, which raised the alarm to alert a rescue team. Immediately, a team of rescuers were called in to the location of the accident. Rescuers arrived at the location of the shaft. With them, they had brought oxygen tanks, which helped treat all 7 cavers at the shaft entrance, and that included the ones that passed out. Meanwhile, at around 12:30 am, a particularly thin oxygen tank was sent down the tunnel to Neil. By this point, Neil himself also looked unconscious, so that didn't work out. By now it was midnight, and after spending a decent amount of time, the rescuers themselves started suffering from the foul air. So from time to time, they had to keep returning to the surface, which became extremely inconvenient. The focus must be to save Neil, but it got very difficult. Here's a picture of Neil's caving companions when they returned back to the surface due to polluted air in the cave and also for a change of clothes. As you can see, they are almost breaking down. Everyone in the team at first thought the rescue would be a mere matter of lowered ropes and heaving, but with time, the truth dawned on them, and this picture shows it all: the shock and remorse. Some time went by. Compressed air tanks pumped oxygen down the shaft in an attempt to blow the carbon dioxide out. Meanwhile, the other cavers tried tunneling through to the shaft, hoping they would come out below Neil and pull him to safety, but sadly, none of their attempts also succeeded. So far, they have spent 9 hours tirelessly trying to rescue Neil, and yet no one was able to rescue or at the bare minimum help him in any way. He was suffering every second he spent stuck in the tunnel. When everybody ran out of all the options they had, they called in for a special pro caver. He was particularly small and therefore perfect to fit inside narrow cave passages. Along with him, an 18-year-old experienced caver, June Bailey from Manchester, also turned up to try to help Neil. According to the media reports from the time, she even had been instructed to break Neil's collarbones in order to free his shoulders if it ever came to that. She gave her everything to try and save him, yet was unable to get him out. Similarly, the small caver also attempted many times, but the outcome was no different from Bailey's. By Monday, almost a day after the team went on the expedition, everybody could hear Neil's labored breathing as he struggled loudly. A heartbreaking moment. The young caver was getting closer to his end in the middle of the tunnel below the rescuers. To make matters worse, it started raining pretty heavily. There were obvious dangers of flooding in the cave system, and everybody was forced to abandon the rescue operation temporarily. After a while, when raining stopped and the danger of a flash flood was over, everybody crawled back through the extremely muddy tunnels into the chamber and to the entrance of the shaft where Neil was stuck in. When they returned, they could no longer hear Neil breathing. It meant only one thing. Neil had passed away all alone down in that chamber and inside its nightmarishly small tunnel. An RAF doctor later declared the young caver dead in the early hours of Tuesday morning in spite of not being able to see the body. The exact time of Neil's death was unclear, but the inquest stated it as 3 a.m. on Tuesday 24th of March 1959. While all this was happening, Neil's dad, Eric Moss, was outside of the cave entrance. He didn't want to leave until he sees his son, but sadly he was not able to see his son, and instead he was faced with the news of his son's passing. Eric was devastated. It was truly a sad sight to see, a father coping with the death of his son. Later, Eric had one request, a request to leave his son where he was so that no other lives would suffer the same fate in the tunnel. The authorities respected his wish and made sure that Neil will be left alone inside the shaft. Later, the lower shaft was sealed with loose rocks. The news of Neil's death and the incredible attempts made to save him attracted the attention from all parts of the world. Some of the individuals who joined the rescue mission and risked their lives to save Neil was also given awards in recognition of their bravery. This incident changed the cave exploring world. New laws and safety procedures for cave rescue operations were put in place. In fact, some people even demanded for caving to be illegal in the UK. Following the accident, Stalagmite Chamber was renamed as Moss Chamber, as in Neil Moss, in memory of the young man who met his end in pursuit of what he loved, cave exploring. Alright guys, that brings us to the end of this story. Well, it was a pretty sad ending. I hope you enjoyed and even learned something from this whole ordeal. If you like stories like this, please let me know in the comment section, and also please consider subscribing. I would really appreciate that. Alright guys, that's all for this video, and I'll see you guys with another story pretty soon. Until then, stay safe out there and goodbye.